aim to motivate and inspire viewers to enjoy the clothes they wear as an expression of their personality and their beliefs. This is the Slow Wardrobe. Come and have a look. Hello, welcome to episode 63 of the Slow Wardrobe podcast. My name is Linda and I'm your host. This episode is a little bit different from most in the sense that I'm not going to spend the first half of the episode sitting here talking about my knitting. There is plenty of talk about my knitting, but it's kind of interwoven with the Layercake section of this podcast. I will update you on my progress with the progress on my Shifty shown here. I'm going to show that on my body and talk about proportions and length in the next section. And I will show some of my other knits as well, together with Layercakes, because today's episode is specifically dedicated to alterations of your Layercakes, modifications of your Layercakes, and proportions when it comes to combining garments, especially with your hand knits. It is such a disappointment when you've gone through the motions of knitting your own jumper, then putting it on and deciding that actually something's not right. And that may be one big thing or a couple of little things. And all together, they then add up to a garment that you're just not going to wear. That happened to me quite recently. And I want to talk to you in more depth about that to help all of us minimize the number of times that happens to any of us. So let's dive straight in with alterations and modifications, and then further along talk knitwear in combinations with the rest of our wardrobe. Enjoy. So alterations, modifications and proportions is what today's Layercake section of the podcast is about. I will first tell you what I'm wearing and then talk about alterations, especially talking about Layercakes that are too big or too small on you. So I'm wearing my large purple check play suit like this. And over the top, I've got my magpie love dress. Now, this love dress was our first prototype, and the shoulder area, the neckline is a little bit too wide. And I can wear this dress perfectly because I'm lucky enough for my shoulders to carry that extra wide neckline. But when I put, for example, my iPhone in my pocket, then that's enough of a weight for the whole dress to cantilever a little bit and slide to one side, and it'll start sitting like this. And that is because this dress is also a little bit too wide in the underarm area, because of course we added that dolman sleeve and that add extra width to the circumference, the bust circumference. That extra width is great for movement, so there's no restrictions on your arms when you wear one of these, and that's the whole idea behind them. But there's a little bit of extra width, and this one has a little bit extra still, so this is almost suitable for a size 2. And I've spoken about it in a previous episode. That's the case with the final version of the love dress as well. If you're on the cusp between a 1 and a 2, so you're small 2, then you could wear a size 1. If you're a small 1, then you can probably wear a size 0. And I am updating the measurement section of the website to reflect exactly what these measurements are, so you can double check that, and when in doubt, drop me a line. However, back to the original point of alterations. So now you've got that love dress and you've been wearing it and you've been losing weight. So you're starting to suffer from the same point that I just made, that even though we've made the neckline smaller, because you've got more room here, the dress can tilt. With that extra space, it can tilt. This happens with smocks and tabards and play suits as well. And the idea for this section of the podcast today came from a query I got from one of my customers who's on that cusp in between sizes, wanted to buy a new smock and wasn't sure what to do with her existing smocks and was asking advice about it because she was on the cusp between sizes. And I posted my answer as a story on Instagram. I've saved the stories in the Make, Do and Mend highlights underneath my profile, so you can see it back there again, but I will show it to you in a minute here. And that gave me the idea. I was like, actually, I had quite a lot of responses to that story of people saying, this is really useful and thank you. And so I thought, well, let's talk about this in a little bit more depth. So back to the love dress. You've got this love dress and it's a bit too big. First of all, when Layercakes are too small or too big on you, we can discuss it and we can make the alteration. The alteration fee is the same as a bespoke garment fee. It's £30 per garment. If you end up sending us a large number of garments, like 3 or more, then I will adjust the price a little bit so it will not become astronomical, especially because we then have a whole little bunch of garments that all need the same thing doing to it. And just like with the production of regular new layer cakes, the more you do of something, then you can nibble away a little bit on the cost, and I will pass that saving on to you. So £30 per garment if you want us to alter it. Now, let me talk about those alterations. Back to the love dress again. The main thing and the easiest place to alter a love dress that is too big is at this line of the dolman sleeves. What you end up doing, and I'll put a picture next to here to show you the kind of line that you create, is you end up taking in this curve under the arms, which will reduce the bust measurement and in effect it's almost slightly lengthen the sleeve. So there's a little bit more fabric that is sitting right here that is currently part of the body of this love dress that will end up, because you're nipping it in a little bit, transferring to the sleeve section. So you're really pulling that area in a little bit. Like I said, I'll show you here what that looks like in terms of how you would pin that to narrow it. So if you are confident enough to do this yourself, then you turn the dress inside out, pin those sections, make sure that they're exactly the same on both sides, and then sew those new lines. Before you sew the lines, try the dress on to make sure that it fits you with those new seams. Then sew them, and then you can cut the old edges away and of course do some zigzagging, or if you're lucky enough to have an overlocker, then overlock the edges so you won't have any fraying on the underarms. So that's a quick tip to reduce the size of your love dress. In terms of the layer cakes that don't have any sleeves on them, and of course we've got many of those, there are some very easy ways to alter those as well. And the easiest way to stop a layer cake from slipping off your shoulders, a layer cake that is sleeveless, especially because we've got the big armholes, that those big armholes again allow for cantilevering when it all gets a bit roomy. So it also may happen when you have a bigger bust, so the circumference is still fine, but your shoulders are slightly more narrow, or in some cases, as we get older, we lose some muscle from around the shoulder area, and we still need the volume of the dress or the garment for the bust, but around the back and around the shoulders, it's all getting slightly less. So then the best tip to alter your layer cake quickly and easily yourself is to pull it up on the shoulders. So what I mean with that is, actually I'll take this dress off so you can see what I mean and what is exactly that I'm talking about. Bear with me. So with the dress off, I'll be able to show you what I'm talking about. So mind the bingo wings. The shoulder seam of the play suit or any of the other sleeveless layer cakes, is of course right on the top. You fold the fabric double at the place of the shoulder seam and you pull the whole thing up. Right now I've got it pulled up about 2 inches. Can you see that? I'm of course nipping it with my finger, so part of this fabric disappears, but it would be about 2 inches. I could put some pins across where I've nipped the fabric double, and I'll show you the picture of what that looks like. I keep pointing there. That's what I do when I sit down with the knitting section. The pictures of what I'll show you to illustrate for this section, of course, are on this side where I've got more space on my screen. I'll learn one day. So just like I show on the screen there, you can see that the shoulders, it's just laying flat. The shoulders are double and flat, and then you pin across. That particular example is pinned at 1 inch down, and you can do that on both shoulders. Put the garment back on and see how it sits. You can also go for 2 inches. In all cases, before you do any sewing, put the garment back on to see how it fits with that alteration. You'll get the flaps standing up on your shoulders. Ignore them. We're going to do something about those. But that can show you what happens. It also helps if you want to wear this with less garments underneath. I'm wearing a bralette. You see a lot of the side of it. So if I were to pull this up, of course, it will also make your layer cake slightly shorter, but most importantly, of course, it reduces the depth of the armhole, and that may work for you. So check that, put it back on. The other thing that it does is, because you're pulling this up, the neckline by definition will come smaller and narrower. So there is less room for movement there as well. So the whole garment will get a bit shorter, your armholes will get less deep, and there's less room for movement around the neck and shoulder area, so the cantilevering will stop. When you are confident and comfortable that you have put those pins in the right place, then either by hand or on the sewing machine, you sew straight across that line where the pins are. Make sure you go a little bit backwards and forwards at the beginning, at the end, if you're sewing by machine, to make sure that the stitches don't come easily undone. And then, of course, you've got those 2 lines and the little flap standing up. Those are easily dealt with by folding them forward, not altering anything else, just fold the little flaps forward, choose some nice pretty buttons and put the buttons on top of the flaps and sew the buttons through the flaps and through the front panel. So the whole thing stays tacked down, and it just looks like a playsuit that is closed with buttons at the top. Of course, nothing has changed. You still don't have to take it off when you go to the loo, but it looks like an embellishment rather than an alteration. If you notice that when you pick it up, you can probably see that a little bit on the photograph as well, that the front and back bit of the shoulder strap are slightly different in width. What you'll notice in most cases is that the shoulder strap in front stays the same width for longer than in the back. In the back it goes a bit wider because it starts to go towards your neck. Then what you do in choosing how to sew it is you line up the edges of the armhole and you allow that difference in width to show on the inside, on the neck side, and then just sew it across. Even though your top layer here from the front is slightly shorter than the one in the back, don't worry about that, just go for it, and then do the rest as instructed. Fold it forward and tack it down with a button, and it'll look fine. It'll look great, in fact. So I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know, because of course I can give more detailed instructions and I can publish more photographs if you deem that useful. So that was about making the adjusting the shoulders in a very quick and easy way. Of course, if you are a very confident seamstress, you could also unpick all these seams here, both on both sides of the facing as well as the shoulder, then re-sew the shoulder seams on outside and the facing, and then bag out, as we call it, the facing with the side seams. If you don't know how to bag out, which is a way of turning a garment inside out and doing both of the seams, then you can also just fold them in and top stitch through both layers to sew everything back together again. So that is a more complicated but also quite neat way of doing this if you're a more confident seamstress. We can do that as well for you, and you will not see at all that the garment that is altered. Such is the expertise of Andrea with things like this. She can make that alteration, take 1 or 2 inches, take the garment 1 or 2 inches up, and you will not see the difference. So that's back to that alteration fee, if should you prefer it. It's also possible, of course, to go the other way. What if your layer cake is too small? In the case of a love dress, the only easy place we can adjust that is on the back seam, to put a strip in between, which does not look great. However, because your love dress is more likely to be slightly roomy, the chance that you'll grow out of it, for want of a better word, is a lot smaller than with some of the other layer cakes. So if we ignore the love dress with the seams, although don't give up, if you have queries about making it larger, always check with us. We can always give you hints and tips of how to achieve a good fit again. But for now, the sleeveless layer cakes, the most common place where a layer cake will start nipping you, because most of them have either a tulip shape, a curvy tulip shape, or an A-line, is around the bust. So if you're bursting at the seams around the bust of your layer cake, then the best and easiest place to alter it is underneath the arms and the side seam. I will show a photograph of a knitwear designer called Kath Andrews. She does some really nice designs, so check out her work. But Kath had an example of a smock that was too small and that she wanted to make bigger, to alter. And she checked with me about putting some wedges in underneath the arms of her smock. And as you can see in the picture, I think she used black fabric. I think she specifically asked me for black. But you can make those wedges in any color you like. You can also make the wedge out of the same color fabric as the rest of your smock, or tabard, or play suit, or whichever it is. The thing to keep in mind is that if you have washed your layer cake a number of times, together with the fact that there may be slight dye variations in the different batches of a particular color, that there may be a color difference between the color of your layer cake that you want to alter and the new piece of fabric that we sent you to make some wedges out of. So it is in a lot of cases safer to go for a different color, maybe one of the two that are in the cross weave if you're wearing a cross weave layer cake, for example, or a completely different color altogether, like Kath did with the black wedges. But it's an idea. It's up to you really. And again, we're very happy to give you any hints and tips if you're unsure. But that's an option. You open up the side seam and you put in a wedge like so in the picture. And of course you do that on both sides. If you decide to go for a contrasting color, then of course you can embellish that particular garment in other places as well with that contrasting color. You can put some edges on the pockets, for example, or put patches on. You can put some embroidery in the same color as the wedges. So you can do other things to that garment to pull the whole thing together again if you end up being conscious about a contrast color wedge. You can also choose to make that wedge out of a color that you wear a lot with that garment. So in the case of Kath, she would wear that purple smock a lot with black tops, then black is a great color to make the wedge out of, because it will just make the whole thing disappear and fit together and kind of integrate as an outfit that way. So that's another way to increase the size of the garment. And again, that is something we can do for you if you cannot do it yourself. Now on to modifications of your garment, because these are alterations to adjust for size. But how about adjusting for height, for example, or adjusting for shape? It is possible with a smock or a tabard, for example, to lob off the tips. If you bought your smock or tabard in a wild mood and thought, yes, I am going to start wearing more interesting hemlines, and you find 2 years down the line that actually the idea was there, but in reality it's always one of those not today garments, then alter it. They are all long enough, even at their shortest points, to turn them into tunics. And by taking them down to the size of their shortest length, you can equalize the hemline and straighten it all the way across and around. And you do not have to cut them above the facing. What you could do is unpick the bit of the facing, if you're talking about a smock in the front or with a tabard around the sides, you can unpick the facings and then cut the fabric where it is sewn into a hem, so like right at the bottom with the points going forward or the points going to the side. Cut it across and then re-hem it. And it may even be possible for you to use the facings to make smaller facings to hem your new tunic with. So that's a way of making quite a dramatic alteration to a garment that you find you don't wear often enough. Another alteration that we have done in the past was to take a larger size smock, and in the case of somebody with a much shorter frame, so size 2 smock, for somebody who's about 5 foot tall, the points would be almost down to your ankles. And in that case, we have managed to shorten the points without losing that silhouette altogether, but we shortened the bottom and the points to create new proportions for a much shorter frame. So that is something that we could do as well if you have an existing garment and you want to change those proportions for you specifically. When in doubt, ask. We can in almost all cases do something about it. And the real hump to get over is to pay for an alteration that will give a garment that is worth wearing for years a new lease of life. And the reason that it is a little bit of a hump to pay out that kind of money is because a lot of us are used to paying £30 or less for a piece of fast fashion that is made on the other side of the world by people who are not paid properly for their labor and for their livelihoods. So we see the real cost of garments still really out of context and out of proportion. In reality, the prices that I charge for Layercakes, considering that they are made in the UK, are still too low. I should go up with my prices if I would want to price them fairly compared to everything else that is out there. I don't want to do that though, because I realize that the higher I make the prices, the more people perceive the Layercakes to be out of their market, out of their league, and out of their available budget. That is also because we're all used to buying a lot more garments in the course of the year than what's really strictly necessary. If you are truly honest with yourself, then, and you would separate out in your wardrobe the number of garments that you wear very regularly, you'll find that you wear 20% of your wardrobe 80% of the time, if not more extreme even than that. So if we go back a long time, I'm talking about 100 years or so, then a new garment was an investment that you would make once or maybe twice a year, not every month or every other month. And that is not to say that we need to go back to that. It's just to say that fast fashion has gotten us used to having a huge wardrobe of things that we wear only very little and then discard when they start looking tatty, as opposed to seeing real value in the craftsmanship of the making of the garment and in the quality of the fabric, which is one of the big contributors to my prices. The quality of the fabrics is the highest I can get. So is the quality of the makes. So as a result, we're used to a much bigger turnover, and we're not used to making do and mending or altering our garments to give them a new lease of life. And that's what I'm always trying to impart on you, to give your garments, any of your garments in a wardrobe, a chance to start wearing them again and to really use up the life that they have in them. And if you really can't, of course, then you can always pass them on. But don't let them hang there thinking that at some day in the future you're going to wear them again. If it's a matter of shrinking back into garments, you may find that by the time you do so, you don't like them anymore, or your color palette has changed or whatever. So try and stick with the garments that you know and love, and try and do what you can to keep wearing them. Hence the ideas of altering and modifying them. I hope that's a helpful idea. The last suggestion I wanted to talk about is about making your layer cakes longer. I've talked about shorter by taking them up or lobbing bits off the bottom, but what about making them longer? Some of you may remember this photograph that I posted on Instagram last spring, which was of a prototype layer cake playsuit that I had made out of herringbone linen. And the herringbone turned out to be completely the wrong fabric to try and make playsuits out of, because of it having a lot of bias movement in the fabric, and as a result it's not a suitable fabric. It doesn't drape properly. The seams start splitting very easily, of course, especially the one on the back. And this is not a seam splitting because of the garment being too small, but a seam splitting because of the garment being stressed a little bit when you sit down. So that particular playsuit, you can see that it's got some dark edges at the bottom. That is because it ended up by mistake on a wash that was too hot, and then it was put in the dryer, all not by me. It was all helpful little angels at home. As a result, it had shrunk a little bit. It's unusual for layer cake fabrics to shrink, but they can do it if the temperature is far too high, and if it's a looser weave like the herringbone in the first place. If you will wash that hot enough and you dry it at a high heat, then it will shorten a bit. It wasn't much, but enough for me to want to do something about it. And what I did was make cuffs, for want of a better word, like double layer of linen that I stitched on the inside of the bottom hem of the playsuit. So it looked like I was wearing something else underneath it. And in the back, I strengthened the back seam by taking a strip of that same dark linen and sewing a strip over the top of the back seam, which of course then divides the tension on the fabric in half, because that strip is sewn down on both sides. So then you have two seams that will receive a bit of stress when you sit down, but that was enough to not make it split anymore. So I sewn that seam, that strip over the top. And that was one of the ways that I wanted to impart on you today, to make a layer cake longer. You could do the same thing with a dress, for example. You can have a strip or a small section of fabric, could be the same or a very contrasting color, that you sew underneath to make the dress longer. And then if you're using a contrasting color, you can again play with that at other parts of the dress to lengthen sleeves, for example, or embellish the pockets, like I said before, so you can pull it together into one garment. Imagine putting really big cuffs, for example, so literally an elongating bit of double fabric like we have on the shirts onto here. So you have a cuff that you can fold over or roll up, for example. That's another way to make sleeves longer and lengthening a dress. Same you could do with a smock or a tabard. You could fill in the sections that are with a smock in the middle, with that bow in the middle. You could fill that in and straighten the bottom. Same with the tabard. You can put a piece of fabric that goes from the front point to the back point and fills up that section. So think of it as a blank canvas and see where you could change and alter its shape and lengthen a garment instead of shortening or tightening it. So the idea of the strip on the back, I just touched on that with the play suit in the herringbone. That didn't work, but that again is something that you can keep in mind for your layer cakes as well. If for whatever reason you have the feeling that any of these seams is under too much strain, then you could take some ribbon, for example. Grosgrain ribbon is really nice, or some satin ribbon, or you can buy cotton or linen ribbon as well, or even bias tape to put over the top of the seam, hide any edges that are starting to pull, and sew it down on both sides, and that will divide the amount of stress on that back seam or on side seams, wherever they are, in half, because you've got two seams that are pulling, that the fabric is pulling on, rather than just one seam. So any questions about that, let me know. I will now talk a little bit about the proportions of your outfit when you're adding any knitwear to it, and proportions that do and don't work and why. And I've brought a couple of examples to show you. I'll put on my first work in progress, which gives me the idea to talk about this in the first place. So here is the progress on my Shifty. I showed last week or the week before, I don't remember, but I showed this picture on Instagram of my work in progress. I hadn't started this sleeve yet. I literally just had the end of the yokes on the arms, and I was in the process of finishing the body. And the body was at that point this length. And I said, well, what do you think? How much longer shall I make this? And I got a lot of reactions from people saying, I wouldn't make it any longer, it's perfect as it is. So the only thing I added was the edge, the bottom edge. Of course, I can't think, I want to call it a cuff. It's not a cuff, of course. Never mind. Brain fart. Anyway, so I've added this length that adds 2 inches, and look how it changes the overall proportions compared to that picture. The only difference is adding this. So the only difference is between this as a final length or this as a final length. Now the reason that I didn't think that back to put the border on, the bottom border on at that shorter length is because at the moment it goes just beyond my waist, and I do like the idea, because this is such a fitted garment, that I'll be able to wear it underneath things. So I thought it'd be handy to have it waist length for that reason, to be able to wear it underneath things. But I also recognize that those proportions of that outfit look good. Now, why does that look good? The main reason for that is because of how that works with my shape. if I go down to my waist, then the next bit of my body are my hips. My hips are relatively high because of the amount of overweight I carry. So I've got big love handles here. I'm doing something about it. I'm losing weight, guys. I'm doing it. But that then connects to that larger width. Whereas if I go a little bit shorter and I finish the garment pretty much where my ribs finish, then my waist is the next bit, which is smaller, of course, than my hips. And then if you see it in combination with a tulip shaped dress, which nips in a little bit at the waist and then goes out fast enough to skim my hips so they don't get accentuated, then the overall effect is more slimming. Can you see that? I don't have much of a bust, but the bust that I do have gets accentuated by this cropped length. Then I have a nice difference in circumference between what my dress is doing here and then what it does around my hips. So I create the illusion of more of an hourglass shape, which is still in our society deemed to be more attractive than straight up and down. And by adding this, putting this down, I lose a little bit of that definition. It's more an illusion of definition, but still. Can you see that? So I haven't quite made up my mind as to what I'm going to do yet. Maybe I'll leave it longer, maybe I'll make it shorter. I think what I'm going to do is finish it, and then the sleeves are, I think, about bracelet length, so it's a little bit more sleeve to come and then a cuff. They're going to end up not really 3/4, a little bit longer than 3/4. I really like the idea of that length. So I think I'm going to stick to the pattern for the sleeve length and then knit the other sleeve, of course, and then start wearing it and see whether it ends up being a garment that in reality I'll wear more like this, or whether that extra length is actually useful. So that about proportion, and where in the past I would never have considered this, thinking, yeah, I end up with too much of a big block of solid color here by wearing something so cropped. Depending on how and where that crop sits, could work really well. By the way, I've had feedback from people who said that there have been a lot of problems around the fit of the Shifty, and Andrea, the designer, has just released a complete overhaul of the pattern where she's addressed all of that. I think when I'm wearing a love dress like this and those dolman sleeves are pulling a little bit on my shoulders here, I think that addresses some of the issues that the sweater is renowned for having, but I've also transferred a little bit more of the yoke stitches to my sleeves. So and that's a modification that I made before the new pattern came out. So I think the issue that the jumper has for other people may be less prevalent in mine. So I'm quite happy with how this is fitting so far. And of course, it'll look different again when I wear it without a love dress underneath. And you'll see me post pictures of this as I progress it on Instagram. So I'll keep you posted on the fit. But that's what I wanted to show you in terms of how different those 2 extra inches makes with where it hits you on your body. And that is something to keep in mind for your particular shape when you make your knits. And I will show you some other knits, some that really work well and one that really doesn't, and explain why, to just give you more information as to what to look for and why some things do or don't work. And those rules may be slightly different on you, but what I'm hoping to achieve with this is to show you how to look at those proportions and what to look out for to make something that works for you. On to the first example. So here's the jumper that I knitted out of Biche et Bûche Le Petit Lamb's wool last year from a kit that I bought at Loop London. It's one of my favorite favorite jumpers because I think everything about its fit and its shape works for me. And I'll put the name of the jumper and the designer down here, so I won't reel that off with all the different ones that I'm showing you, but it's a pattern that's available for you to buy on Ravelry. And I made some alterations to this jumper to improve its proportions and fit for me specifically, and I'll talk you through those. What I did was change the back panel by putting in a number of short rows. I put in some short rows here. If I remember correctly, that's in the pattern, so there was no alteration there. But as I got further down, I put in short rows in the back panel, and as you can see now, the back is longer than the front. So the overall jumper has got a little bit of the sweep that you see in some of the Layercakes, most recently the Love Top. The Love Top, I'll show a picture of it here with that sweep, or actually, I don't have to show a picture, you can see it on this mannequin. The Love Top in the back is slightly longer than the front, so it has that sweepy line that I'm talking about. There's not a huge difference, but it makes for a very elegant look and fit. Shorter in the front, a little bit longer in the back. And the other thing that I did was really block the jumper in a way that it has a bit of an A-line. The number of stitches doesn't actually go up. I may have gone up a needle size as I go further down, but that creates an A-line going down with a very roomy bottom edge that I did in garter stitch. So rather than nipping it back in with a normal 1x1 rib, I have made it look even slightly more wide and really follow that A-line with a garter stitch that I also blocked out very nicely to make for a very fluid line at the bottom, as you can see. And when I feel the stretch of this with the color work above it, I can feel that this has got slightly more stretch because there's no color work anymore. So that accentuated that A-line even more. And same with the sleeves. I did less in terms of decreases. I don't know exactly what the deal was with the decreases. I think you keep the stitch count up a lot, quite a lot, and then you decrease for the cuff, and it creates a slightly billowy shape at the sleeve, which I didn't like the idea of at all. I liked to have the 3/4 length sleeves that I've got, and I've just gone for a 1x1 rib that I blocked out, so it's nice and stretchy and open and it's not pulled in at all. So this is a shape that really works for me, and up until recently I believed that this kind of shape is really, and length is really the best shape and length for me for any knit. I had the feeling that anything shorter would not really work on me. But of course it all depends on what you wear it with. So if you use a Layercake and its flowy lines and its shaping that it comes with as a backdrop for a knit, then there is a lot more room to play with. And I'll show you that with the next jumper, which follows a fairly similar line in terms of shape, but it is a lot shorter. And that's not something that I would have considered in the past at all. But I now know that combined with the right garments, it really looks great. Let me show you. One of Junko's designs, I'll put the details underneath. And I've done the same thing. This is straight, this garment, but I've blocked it so that it follows a bit of an A-line. A little bit less pronounced than the other one, but still a little bit of an A-line, nice and loose at the bottom. And this one doesn't have any extra short rows in the back to give it a front and back, so it's completely symmetrical. And you can see that. You can see that the neckline pulls up further in the front. That's the effect of not having that tilting effect of the short rows in the back. Doesn't bother me. I really like the look of it. And it's got the 3-length sleeves again, but it's got a dramatically different length from the previous one. We're really talking about like 3 inches or so, which is a lot, especially at the front. Also, this jumper doesn't have the sweep that I'd given to the previous one. So this goes straight across, and because it hits me just above the pockets of my layer cakes, it ends up being a great length, together with the fact that its circumference gives me positive ease around the hips. And that is something to take away for you to think about when you are knitting a garment that is straight. We tend to go by the circumference of the bust and whether that fits us. But if you go by the circumference of the hips, especially if your hip circumference is bigger than your bust, then you won't end up with something that ends up looking a little bit loose at the top and tight at the bottom, which is what is completely the wrong look and what will put you off from wearing it. So like the layer cakes, if that A-line and if that curve ends up working for you, then start with your hip measurements when you choose the size of your jumper, or knit to your size at the top, but do some increases to create an A-line. As long as that jumper skims your hips rather than sits tight on them, you'll end up with a look and a feel that you are happy with in the mirror and that feels comfortable when wearing. So much for the idea of proportions when you are comparing hips with bust. And that's a discovery that I made when I knitted the following garment, which I will show you now. And then we're really properly in the region of very boxy garments. That's the next one. I'll put it on for you now. Here it is, one of my beloved Gramps Revive cardigans, cropped, relatively cropped. And it's about the same length as the jumper that I was just wearing. It just finishes at the just above the pocket, so that's a great length in combination with my layer cakes. I wear this a lot in combination with the with any of my play suits. This is knitted in one of Sharon's 5 Moons yarns. I think it's called Diana. I'll put the details below here, available on the website, and it's in combination with Yak Blend 2 for the contrast colors. They have the same yardage and they both have this lovely sheen, so it works a treat. The main thing that I wanted to highlight here is that this is made very boxy by giving it a lot of positive ease. And this discovery that I made was that if I add the recommended positive ease to my hip measurement for a boxy knit and then knit the garment, I end up with the look that the garment is going for. It is big and oversized, but I lose half of that effect because my hips are wider than my bust. So I use my hip measurement as a guide. If your bust is bigger than your hips, then of course use your bust measurement as a guide. If they're the same, lucky you, you can use either. So see the effect of the boxy fit and the nice looseness of this garment on me. I am going to compare that for you now. Oh, by the way, this has got very long sleeves. I just pulled them out. All my Gramps Cardis have got very long sleeves. I either prefer a 3/4 length sleeve, or I want something that is long enough to pull over my hands when it's chilly. Same goes for the next jumper. It's got that really boxy shape, as in almost square, or a rectangle on its side rather, like this. But it's much longer and bigger still. And I want to show you how that works as an oversized fit. Here it is, another firm favorite. Details below. And if I stretch my arms out, you can see that it's another rectangle on its side. The width is bigger than its length, so it's got that very boxy look, very oversized. So this has got a lot more positive ease still, and you can see what a lovely enveloping blanket that becomes when you wear it. So bigger, if you talk about a lot of positive ease, can be better when you proportion it right. If this garment would be another 4 inches longer, it would not look quite as good. It looks lovely and cozy now. If I would make it this size, but 4 inches longer, it would completely swamp me. So the proportions are important in that respect, and be very aware of that when you are in the habit of buying oversized clothes, because you don't want to emphasize your curves or your bits and bumps depending on how you feel about them too much. Then be careful that you don't end up looking like Uncle Fester, like as in just a big, I'll show a picture of him here, not the face bit, but the body bit, just a big shapeless square that with everything underneath hidden. One of the things that I try to achieve with, that I aim to achieve with Layercake, is to make elegant and shapely and sophisticated garments that follow a body shape, emphasize its best bits, if you like, and skim over the bits that we don't want it to stand out. And I think that works really well for most body shapes. I'm still in the process of playing around with different construction for people who at the moment believe that Layercake is not quite the right shape for them, and more about that in the future. The obi belt actually was a big effort to try and highlight more narrow waists for those that have them. The issue with more closely fitting Layercakes is that I have to explode the number of different sizes in which we make them to more closely fit the body shape of all the different people wearing them. And the brand is literally not big enough. I'm still the smallest label in the world, as I call myself. It is still peanuts. So a lot more growth is necessary before I can go there. But for now, it's not bad. I'm not complaining. And I hope that you find this useful. Now, what about taking this kind of length, but narrowing it down a little bit and go for a slightly more traditional jumper shape? I'm going to show you where and how I went completely wrong without realizing, with one of my latest knits that I completed not too long ago. My hopes were so high, and I'm going to show you why it doesn't work. Again, to help you not make the same mistake. Here it is. My beautiful, beautiful Fair Isle jumper. Oh my gosh, I waited for a long time because of all the COVID supply issues for Jackie from Hot Butter Yarns, Jackie Bog, to send me the kit to knit this jumper, and I was very excited about it, and it ended up being something different from what I hoped it would be. One of the reasons for that is that I knitted a very large size because I wanted this to be oversized and boxy, and I actually, in terms of its circumference, did a reasonable job if the jumper would have been this length. It is a lot longer. It's longer for two reasons. First of all, I kept to the pattern, and I probably should have left a couple of motifs out to make sure that I would get the cropped length. But I wasn't anticipating the fact that the neckline, when I got to the end of the pattern, ended up being far too wide on me. Where this grey and chartreuse little circle is, that is where the neckline ended, and look where that hits my shoulders. So if I would have put the rib of the neckline here, then it would have barely stayed on me. It was far too wide. So I ended up continuing the process of decreases and making the neckline more fitted as a result. that extra knitting that I did has allowed the jumper to drop down a little bit further still. So it has become a little bit longer still than it would have been without that extra work around the neck. Plus I didn't leave any of the motifs out. So the overall jumper is far longer. And because of my hip measurements and the way in which I wear my clothes, it ends up looking very blocky and straight. Can you see that? If it would have been, I'll see if I can show you in the mirror. Imagine that the whole thing would have been about this length. Sleeves a bit shorter because I've knitted them really long, as you can see, because I wanted to pull them over my arms, over my hands, sorry. But if these were a bit shorter as well, like this, combined with a shorter length, I think the whole thing would have been better. It would have looked good, just as colorful. It adds a really nice layer to my outfit, and it looks good in proportion to the rest of me and the rest of my clothes. Whereas this, it just doesn't do it. Can you see it? Now, the other thing that I think is not great is somehow I love the colors, but they don't really love me back. It ends up being quite an autumnal palette, and my season in terms of colors is winter. Bear with me, I need to blow my nose. That's better. So, all in all, I thought, yeah, I'm just not going to end up wearing this. There are no dramas. It's a beautiful sweater. It's not a bad fit, but altogether there's enough wrong with it for me never to pick it up. My husband then spotted it and absolutely dove on it because he loves things like this. He loves colorful knits. He thinks that are far too little colorful clothes for men in the world. It's all brown and blue and gray and green, and he hates all of that. He's a very colorful dresser. And this looks fantastic. The proportions are perfect. The fit is perfect. He absolutely loves it. I will show you a photograph of him wearing it again here. And it just looks so much better on him than it will ever look on me. So, problem solved. But I wanted to show it here so that if you end up with a knit and you think like, yeah, it's just not great. It's just not, there are little bits wrong with it here and there. And as a result, I'll never wear it. Then try and ascertain what it is and where it's going wrong in terms of fit on you, length of sleeves, width and proportions of the yoke, the amount of positive ease, where it sits on you, what its width is compared to the clothes that you're wearing underneath, where does it go wrong if something doesn't fit properly, to help you work out what works best for your body. If you ever want any feedback from me on an outfit that you've put together, like where you go like, is this working or not? I can't see it anymore. Drop me a line, send me a picture. We can even have a Zoom session if you like to show me things and you want feedback on it. Always there to help. And for now, I hope you found this very useful, and I see you again soon.